Welcome back to Take 2 of Dateline New Haven with WNHH's Ukraine war expert David Kamran. We had a few glitches. Then again, there's Take 2 in the Ukraine war because they had a few glitches too of much more monumental impact. David Kamran, WNHH's resident Ukraine expert for for a good half century. He's been studying that region of the world. A Yale political scientist, professor emeritus, former director of Macmillan Centers for Program for European Studies. Welcome, David. It's so nice to see you on Dateline New Haven. Can you hear me now? Oh, boy. David, you still can't hear me? Is your volume down? Boy, Take 2 isn't going any better, I guess. David, we're looking at each other. You can't hear me. Can you turn up the volume on your Zoom? We're doing Zoom instead of in-studio radio.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, David, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. Thanks for coming on Dateline New Haven again. It's always a pleasure. Sorry about all those technical glitches. Dave, bring our listeners up to date. I was trying to do a little bit before the music. We've now entered a different, unexpected phase in Russia's invasion and war on Ukraine. What has changed on the ground? Why has it happened? And what does it mean?
What has happened is that the Russians have decided to focus their invasion or the war on the Donbass, which is the area in eastern Ukraine, some of which is occupied by pro-Russian separatists. And they essentially withdrew from the Kyiv area, in part because they met very strong resistance from the Ukrainian military and the citizens. So they've refocused. They put the operation under a new general.
With a ruthless reputation.
Who's known as the Butcher of Syria.
Yeah.
And he was the head of the Russian forces in Syria in 1516, was awarded Hero of the Russian Federation as a result. And he's now, he will be known in this war, after this war, as the Butcher of Mariupol, because that is in the area that he has commanded and controlled in the war thus far. But he is now in charge of the entire effort. It's a 300-mile line in eastern Ukraine, and the Russians are taking a good amount of that territory in the two provinces, regions, Luhansk and Donetsk. And they're also taking a land corridor, land bridge, they call it, between Russia and Crimea.
Now, is that the big first tactical question, whether they can complete that land bridge, correct? Isn't that why there are a few key points where now they're bombing and bringing troops into certain areas where the civilians have tried to leave and others are in basements trying to resist the Russian war effort, so that they can't get that land bridge and completely seal off one part of the country? Do I have that right, David?
Yeah, and the big problem from the Russian point of view was Mariupol, which is a big city, and it was offering strong resistance, but it's now basically been taken. And Putin announced, in fact, today that that they've taken it. They've blockaded that steel plant, the big Avaz style.
That's a sprawling plant that was also built with a series of underground bunkers where people can live for miles, correct, and not be necessarily targeted, but they can only last so long. They said it was like 6 weeks or something with food. So are those people still underground there? Are they still resisting? Is Putin right?
They're within. They're within the steel plant, and they've tried to negotiate a humanitarian corridor out,
and that hasn't worked.
That hasn't worked thus far. Putin has said he's not going to storm it. There was some talk that they would storm the plant, but he is, I think it was today or this morning, that he said they weren't going to.
And that makes sense, David, right? Because if they can't forever live there without food and water, correct? So he can just wait them out. And the ground could figure out, we're going to see what happens over the next few weeks, whether he succeeds in taking the region or not, correct?
Yeah, but that's a major point in that land corridor, that land bridge. And in fact, they have most of the rest of the territory now between Crimea and Russia, into southern Donetsk
There are
region.
still a few
So,
holdout points, correct? I was reading
oh
about one
yeah,
this morning. Yeah.
oh yeah, there are a lot of holdout points, and there are a lot of. It's actually a 300-mile line front now in eastern Ukraine, and so they are sort of pushing at different points. And
So, David, how do you see this playing out? Do you think it's only a matter of time and not that long a time that Russia controls the whole 300-mile bordered area? Or do you think, and then it becomes a different phase where they get resistance from the people within there after that as they try to occupy it? Or do you think it'll be a success for Putin and then he can move on to another phase of the original aims of the war? Or do you think that's where it's going to end?
all of the
You're on the
above.
hot seat. You got to figure it all out,
Yeah,
David Cameron.
all of the above. Um, well, he has made it known that he plans to have a victory by Victory Day, which is May 9th. So that basically gives him about 3 weeks.
But he could
And
change that, right? That's what the analysts say. Yeah, everyone thought May 9th he wants to
oh
clear.
yeah, oh yeah, he could change it, but if it drags on, it drags on. But the Ukrainian forces are in that area are experienced and they're tough, and they've been fighting the Russians for a long time, since 2014. So along the contact line in that area, so they're experienced. They aren't going to go away quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions will be what happens to that land, that territory, after the war ends, assuming it does end. And if it ends as expected, with Russian control over substantial portion of those two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk, and a corridor to Crimea, how is that resolved? Ukraine has proposed, in the two sides have been exchanging drafts of a peace agreement, and one of the things the Ukrainians proposed was that Russia, of course, wants Crimea to be recognized as part of Russia. Ukraine won't do that, but they have proposed that there be a period of negotiation, diplomatic negotiation over 15 years to resolve the status of Crimea.
Now, do you think that's a realistic position? Is Putin going to just sit tight for 15 years?
Well, they're not talking. They're not talking about it, and he hasn't accepted that idea. And in terms of the region that's now at the focal point, Ukraine has proposed that the resolution of that territory be decided by the two presidents. And that's not satisfactory to Russia either. They have already recognized the two so-called people's republics as independent states. So those issues are still to be played out. And just this morning, in fact, Russia delivered a counter proposal to Ukraine. It hasn't been leaked, and we don't know what's in it yet. But it's probably going to involve outright acceptance of the sovereignty of Russia over Crimea and a substantial portion of eastern Ukraine.
If you were President Zelensky of Ukraine, would you accept that?
No.
Why?
Well, I'd keep fighting. I think I'd keep fighting.
That's the question I want to ask you. We're talking to Dave Cameron, who's our WNHH-FM resident expert on the Ukraine war and one of the world's experts on this. Have we gotten to a point, which is not a way I think, David, you and I like to look at things in the world. Have we done a point where diplomacy, politics are irrelevant, and all that can happen is one side wins and one side loses? I know that's not what they say. Barry Nailbuff, your colleague at Yale, just had a grand strategy column put out yesterday about how you'll have to have face saving on both sides, where both sides can declare victory. Is it kind of looking like the only thing that's going to be on, this is brute force, this is about territory, this is about neither side is going to give up either way, especially Putin. And if Putin gets a little bit now, that opens the door to the next one while he waits for Western resolve to dissipate in terms of long-term economic sanctions. Is there an alternative at this point to just winning a war?
I don't think so. I don't think so with Putin. He will probably be diplomatic when they have a meeting of the presidents, which will happen at some point. The proposal is that there will be a peace agreement. It will be signed by the two foreign ministers, and then there will be a president's meeting. But it's hard to see this being settled at this point by anything other than the war.
And then what does that mean? At some point, would Putin ever declare defeat without launching a nuclear weapon or doing some kind of broader fight?
Well, he's not going to be defeated. We have to work on that assumption that Putin will not cave in, will not be defeated. The only question is when he will decide he's won.
But is Barry Nailbuff right that it is diplomacy? You have to find a way where he can claim he's winning even if he's losing?
Oh, well, he'll claim he's winning. Ukraine will claim that they've fought a good battle. There'll be a resolution of it in some way, but it seems to me that the battle is going to continue for a few more weeks, and the Russian plan is that they will take the territory they want in eastern Ukraine, and there's no reason to think they'll give it back.
Do you think they will definitely take it?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact,
despite all the weapons going to Ukraine now from the West, including a new shipment announced today by President Biden in the U.S., despite that, it's just a matter of time, in your opinion, despite all the weapons we're sending.
Well, if you look, there's an interesting map that's put out by the British defense intelligence people every day on the status of the war, showing what area is controlled and what area is contested. And if you look at the map that they put out today, a very substantial portion of eastern Ukraine is now controlled by Russia. And there are big pockets where it is still contested. But the gist of it is that Russia even now controls much of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions, controls much of the corridor to Crimea, especially now that they've declared that they've taken Mariupol. So Russia isn't going to back away from that. And the only question is whether Ukraine can push them back more, and perhaps the troops and tanks and so forth that are coming from various countries, Slovenia and others, maybe that will help. But I think it'll be fought on the ground.
So, David, why, if you were a policymaker, does it make sense to send billions of dollars to what you seem to think is a futile effort to stop them in the East?
Well, from the point of view of if you're a NATO country, it makes sense because the more you do that, the more you're weakening the Russians. So, because the Russians are taking losses in this as well. So, if you're a brutal realist, you would be supporting Ukraine with weapons.
Because you're worried they're going to invade Moldavia or some other neighboring nation as well, correct?
Well, that's always an issue. But if you look at the that would be a long reach for them now. I mean, the first place they would move west of, say, where they are just north of Crimea would be to Odessa, which is a big port and a very important port for Ukraine. And once you're in Odessa, you're very close to Moldova. But I have a sense that they are not going to go there. It's just an intuitive sense that the Russians are basically carving out a territory in eastern Ukraine for themselves.
And do you believe, David Cameron, that that would stop it? Or do you believe that Putin would continue seeking, even if there's a little interregnum, to go all the way to Kyiv, all the way to Lviv?
No, he's not. I think they've they're still sending in missiles and.
Well, that's to weaken the military, so Ukraine can't stop them in the east, correct? But what I mean is, if Putin declares victory on Victory Day, we've gotten eastern Ukraine, and if he's still saying Ukraine isn't a country, and that it's part of Russia, and that his life goal and career legacy goal is to control all of Ukraine, what's to stop him from keep going once a war ends for now, Western resolve weakens?
Well, he may come back to this. He may come back to this in a few years. But I think the one thing we have to keep in mind is that they didn't anticipate it would be this kind of a fight. They thought that by bombing some of the cities and moving into Kyiv from Belarus, that would decide it, and the government would fall, and the people would demand settlement, and it would be over before it began. And that obviously isn't what happened, in part because the Russian attack was highly disorganized. It had all kinds of flaws in the intelligence that they used in preparing for it. So they are now in the war that they're in, but my sense is they're going to say they won and take what they get over the next 3 weeks. There'll be a settlement. Ukraine may not accept it in full, but I think I don't see them anytime soon moving further to the west. And the thing we haven't talked about, but the thing that's important is the sanctions are hurting Russia. And even though it's still the case that the Europeans are paying for oil and gas and in some sense financing the war, and haven't stopped and have said, well, maybe we'll stop in 2023. Nevertheless, in spite of that, Russia has been hurt economically. There's no doubt about it.
That's the thing. David Cameron, our WNHS resident expert on Ukraine and one of the world's experts on the war as a Yale professor emeritus. So tell me if your scenario is right. So according to you, you think we have 3 more weeks of heavy fighting, if you had to guess. Russia's going to get as strong as they can, probably get the whole 300-mile corridor, you think, declare victory. You don't think anytime soon they go further. They've suffered a lot of losses. And then maybe it'll be after what happened with Crimea. Last time it was 7 years. Maybe this 3 years. Both sides going to lick their wounds. Like, for instance, the Russian people have been sort of shielded from a lot of the information, but now they probably will notice there's been a lot of economic pain and a lot of death in families. And I wonder if Putin's going to have to re-strengthen his own position at home with his own people when there's a little fatigue afterwards, and whether the West is going to have to figure out how to stay resolved, especially if Marine Le Pen wins the French presidential election in conjunction with Viktor Orban winning. You know, Putin must also be looking there saying, yeah, we got some stuff to rebuild, but they're not going to be as strong after this immediate crisis either. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, yeah, because, I mean, look at the damage that's been done to Ukraine, to the cities that have been hit with missiles and artillery, and just Mariupol, a major city, several 100,000, has just been leveled, flattened, almost. And so when you think about and the strikes are going on throughout the country. I mean, we saw earlier this week, even in Lviv. So Ukraine is going to come out of this a very weak state, economically heavily damaged, and having presumably lost some significant portion of its territory. And it's important to keep in mind that the Donbass area is an important industrial area. It's got steel plants, it's got big manufacturing. So Ukraine is going to be in very difficult situation economically, and to say nothing of the population and the people who've left. Those 5 million refugees won't come back overnight because they don't have any place to come back to. This war is going to leave Ukraine in a very difficult position, and it will be up to the Europeans to help Ukraine rebuild. And that will certainly be an important issue for the EU. But for Russia, of course, Putin will look at Ukraine and say, well, Ukraine should be part of us. And he wrote a long paper, or at least put his name to an anonymous.
Right, about how there's no Ukraine.
The historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians was the title.
And he won't be giving up on that.
And he won't give up on that. I mean, the sad irony is, despite the historical unity, he's at war with them, and he's been killing Ukrainians on a daily basis.
So in other words, if I could sum it up, David, because the time has run out. Thank you so much for making time with us again. At this juncture, you predict, though you don't know for sure, 3 more weeks of the war. Russia solidifies its position, gets as much territory as it can in eastern Ukraine, declares victory, and then we have a pause until the next phase of all this. Ukraine, which has been devastated, tries to rebuild. Putin tries to rebuild at home. The West tries to figure out where it's going next. Does that make sense?
That's right, and that's what I would predict. And then, as a last pre-additional prediction, predict Macron will win.
Oh, okay.
By something like 54% to
wow.
46%.
And you know that in 2016 there was no way Donald Trump was going to win. I'm just going to throw that out there, David Cameron.
Yeah, that's true.
But I do take faith.
There was no way he could win in 2000.
I think the New York Times said that Hillary Clinton had something like 102% chance of winning. No, but seriously, they had 99% chance of winning until 8 p.m. when the polls closed. And then they had that minute-by-minute updated.
That's true. So we'll have to wait for the results.
All right, David Cameron, thank you so much for joining us on Dateline. It was so great to talk to you. Just a point of distinction, just a little let Leaves know. David Cameron is the person more than 40 years ago who opened my eyes and got me so interested in finding the story behind the story on foreign affairs. He's always been someone I look to and look up to, professor at Yale and one of the world's expert on this war. David, thank you for updating us.
Thank you, Paul.
And we're going to switch now on Dateline New Haven to Word on the Street, which we're doing a little later today. And I'm going to ask Harry and Nora, who are manning and womaning the controls, whether we're going to take a break or whether we're just going to go straight to Courtney. If I can get a little intel on that. And in the background, you're hearing the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. And we're always inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH-FM. I'm about to get the intel. We're going to take a break. When we come back, it's going to be Word on the Street with Courtney Luciana, our woman out getting the story.